It's like you're passing the teacher, right?
Well, it's the way that they do it in a lot of colleges. And
But who
things.
prepared this? Like, you prepared this?
I just, yeah.
Yeah, in university, that's
This is how they do it.
That's the
Yeah,
thing.
my
That's the standard thing.
I grew up in academia, so it's this is what I've used to.
Time for us to have a yeshiva, no?
Yeah, fine. So last week we did work on this, but I didn't go and review this. I didn't go and review it when we were at the beginning of Shir, so we actually did this inside 2 weeks ago, but not last week. And so I figured we would go through it inside one more time before we move on and go back into the sugya. In order to kind of expedite our learning of this, so that I don't have to explain in depth anything more than is totally necessary in the sugya in which we're learning in Masechet Tamura, we're skipping 2 of the Tiuvtas. So we're moving on from where we were in Teruma, in talking about Terum HaRa Latev, straight on to Tamura, because I explained already at the beginning what Tamura was, the forbidden switching of the Karbanas. And if you remember the 2 facets of the Machlekes, which I'll go over again once we have finished reviewing the actual klal from Mavud. So this is the klal that we're working on right now is Kushia. Kushia makes up about, I would say, 90% of the Shakli Vatari of the Talmud. There's different words for Kushia that if you want to see more in depth, you can find the different words for Kushias in addition to this, by the way, in Sefer Halichas Olam. It examines Halichas, where Mavli HaTalmud is very much like the Mishnah, and it's very kitzer, it's very short, it's very concise as to the wording, and very minimal in terms of the smallest amount necessary and possible in order to explain the Inyanim. The Sefer Halichas Olam is very expansive and explains each of these in great length, and also goes through the different ways that in which the Talmud interact with the Torah itself, the Yud Gimel Midas and also the Lamed Beis Midas of how the Torah, how the Talmud darshans out from the Torah. And I strongly recommend that, because there are, when I was learning with you today, I said Ema can be also Lashon Kushia, Vahag is Lashon Kushia. There's a lot of other Lashonis that are involved, but this is going to be the big one that's going to be the clearest one, that this is a Kushia and this is what it means. So Kushia is a machlekes that comes on a shmua. A shmua is, when you hear that lashon, it's talking about an Amoraic statement, a statement of an Amora, of one of the Chachmei Talmud, who came after the Mishnah. V'lo yichluk achaylik b'halacha mikyemes. This is what's unique about this sort of challenge of a kushya versus the other 2 types of challenges. One of them is a shiloh, which we talked about, and we will talk also about Uraminhu, and we'll talk about maskif. A maskif, or atkafta, is when the Amora literally does not agree with you. But in this particular case, the Amora who's asking the question agrees with the Amora who's answering the question. In other words, I agree with you, but I want to see you bring it out more. So this is where I always use that mashal of, imagine 2 friends are working out in the gym, and one of them sits a weight on top of the other person. Why does he sit a weight on top of him? He sits a weight on top of him, so he'll lift it off and become stronger from it. Just so too, the siman for that is meisvei. Meisvei is Lashon Tiuvta in Aramaic, which means a rejection, but it also could be seen as Lashon mashuv, to sit down, and to sit down something on top of someone. So you're sitting down a weight on top of someone. Why are you sitting down the weight on them? In order that they should lift it off and get stronger. So too, in the case of our Amora who's challenging the other Amora, what's the weight that he's sitting on top of him? sitting on top of him something like a Mishnah or Baraisa. We talked about Mishnah or Baraisa from the time of the Tanaim, and the Amoraim couldn't argue, with a very, very few exceptions. Rabbi Yochanan could not argue on a Tana. They couldn't just argue on it, which means it was taken as accepted fact, basically, and they can't argue on a fact. So they have to find their way logically out from underneath that, or to lift it off of them. So a mesveh, if the people who are challenging are many people, l'mashal, if a Rosh Yeshiva says a very nice svara, a very nice logical idea, then his Bacharim, his Bnei Yeshiva, might challenge him with a mesveh. Mesveh is the siman when there's many people making the challenge. Why? They're not arguing in the Rosh Yeshiva. No, God forbid. You can't. What are you doing to your Rav? They're not arguing on the Rosh Yeshiva. They're trying to help him bring out something that would not have been brought out otherwise. But in the end, they agree on what the halacha should be. And if it's one to the other, it's called isveh. You'll see it as isveh. You'll also see it sometimes in a shortened version. You'll see it masiv, and masiv is a lot of times going to be singular without the yud there, and without the yud there is going to be singular, and that's going to come out like masiv Rav Papa le'Abaya. Rav Papa is challenging Abaya through this construct. He agrees with him on the end halacha, but he agrees with him on the end halacha, but he's trying to get him to strengthen his svara to bring it out more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that someone will challenge himself and say, someone might say, give this objection?
Yes, that is called makshahu mefarak. He'll come up with his own question in order that other people can understand his svara better. He will, an Amora can and will challenge on his own question, and he'll say, basically it's like if I said to you, I have this very nice svara, and I know you're going to say to me that there's this Mishnah here, but let me explain how my svara works with this Mishnah before you even bring it up to me.
Right.
Is basically, he already has it out worked in her mind. That's called humak shamim mafarik, or there's other lashonis for that as well. But regardless, he's the one who's asking. He's the one who's asking. He's the one who is answering, and that does happen. Also, you will find a mesveh in a couple of interesting cases. There's one in Bava Basra, I believe, and then there's another one that I saw in Masechta Brachos in one of the later Pirakim, where someone will do a mesveh to Rebbe. Now, that's not so pashut because Rebbe is a Tana. Rebbe, meaning Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who wrote down the Mishnah. It is possible that one of Rebbe's Talmidim will challenge Rebbe with a mesveh. Now, you might say, how does it make any sense? Rebbe is a Tana. Rebbe wrote the Mishnah. Rebbe can argue on a Baraisa. What's the question? So it was explained to me in a very nice manner that at that point the Baraisas were not Baraisas. They were well-known sayings of great sages of the time, and it wasn't so much a challenge as from the Baraisa as much as it was a challenge from a known statement or a known fact that had already been established at the time. So when Levi or Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi or Rav or Rabbi Chia is challenging Rabbeinu HaKadosh with a mesveh, or with an isveh, I should say, the reason why is because it's a lot of these beraisas were established facts. These toseftas oftentimes established facts that maybe they were left out in the Mishnah, but they were well known and established at the time, even when Rebbe put together the Mishnah. So I didn't mention that before, but it came up in the past week and a half or so. that should be noticed and called to attention. It is possible, number one, for what you asked, and number two, that it's possible that a Meisvei will come to Rebbe. There is also, as it explains in Sefer Aleichem Olam, a possibility that in a Beraisa, or longer Beraisa, a similar Meisvei, a Kushia challenge, will be placed against a Tana from a Pasuk. It is possible, and it is rare, but it is possible, that a Meisvei will come to a Tana from a Pasuk. So just to mention that offhand, it's mentioned in Halichas Olam and not necessarily clearly over here.
But when we see Meisvei, it means to say that it's always coming from an Amoraic. It's always coming from an Amoraya who's bringing an Amora who's bringing a proof from a Tanaic source.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Occasionally, like I said, you're going to see, like Rebbe Chia was an Amora, but not really. Levi was an Amora, but not really. He's there on the cusp of being half Tana, half Amora, and they'll challenge Rebbe sometimes. And also, you will see similar lashon occasionally in longer Beraisas, asking questions on Tanaim from Psukim.
But it's usually,
it's usually
an Amora challenging another Amora.
It's usually an Amora challenging another. Most challenges, all the challenge Shainis that you're going to find in here, are going to be mostly found in the Gemara, which means that it's an Amora challenging another Amora.
And since it's an Amora and he's being challenged from a Tanaic source, he either has to find another
Tanaic source. That's Piruk. We're going to get there in a sec.
Okay.
The Piruk. Okay, so the word Piruk is Melashon Miforik, to unload, like we said. The reason why in Baba Basra he has to have 4 ames outside of his house in the courtyard is so that he can Miforik Ma'asai, so he can unload his load from his donkey. So Miforik means to unload, to take off, to throw off. And so the Piruk is the guy throwing off that weight from his lap. So he puts his friend puts a Kushia in his lap from a Mishnah. You know, Mishnahs can weigh a lot, like 500 tons or 1,000 tons. And have you ever tried lifting a Mishnah? It's heavier in content than it is in weight. Regardless, he lifts it. A Piruk, Mifoidek, is to take off and throw it off of him. So a Piruk, Kushia, it's when someone resolves and answers the Kushia. Like our good friend Daniel said here, there are 2 general category ways that he can do it. Number 1, he can try, and the Amora can try and explain how it isn't actually a kasha for him, meaning how this Berais or this Mishnah goes on a different situation or is not included in his idea, his svara. It's not included, and sometimes that means saying that, explaining according to Psukim, oh, this case with this Mishnah was taken out and therefore is not part of my svara. He says he's logically outside from where this Mishnah is. It's like getting out from underneath it. The second one is to find another Mishnah or Beraisa that supports his opinion. Meaning another a Tana who, to use a colloquialism, that he can hang his hat on. A Tana that he can hang his hat on, and therefore this Mishnah will go according to one opinion, and he'll go according to the other opinion, which is perfectly fine. He doesn't have to necessarily go according to all of the opinions of Tanai. If there's a Tanaic dispute, he can pick one side. We can't, because we're already too far down the line. But an Amora is, very, very recently, and he can kind of still pick one side or the other side to paskin, according to certain Mishnayos, unless there's an established who the halacha goes according to. For instance, an Amora cannot paskin like Beis Shammai. Anyway, a Piruk is the a Piruk is the answer, meaning that he's mefayrik, he's unloading this weight from on top of him. And kishalonichvaku, when it comes out as being a good Piruk, meaning like it's strong enough that it can't be rejected, it can't be argued on. There's no way to undo the Piruk, which is possible, by the way, if a Piruk has a pircha on it. Pircha means a challenge, a problem with it. Then it can result in a Tiuvta, which we're going to talk about in 1 second. But if the Piruk doesn't have a problem with it, then it's halacha mekiyamos. That is how halacha is going to establish in a Kushia will go according to the Piruk. Now, the
fact that it was challenged, the fact that the weight was put on this friend of yours, and the fact that he has brought up this other text in support of his opinion has now actually solidified the relevance of the opinion.
It's solidified of his opinion.
His opinion.
Of his opinion, yes. Because
so
now he has
an opinion that there was a case for to an opinion
that the halacha goes according to.
The halacha.
Because if he can hang his hat very solidly on someone who the halacha would be able to paskin according to, then the Gemara may paskin right according to the opinion of this Amora because he answered this challenge very well. So it can cause his opinion, just as you said, to be from kind of a let's examine this a little bit to a this is it. This is the halacha. As the Gemara will learn later on something. There's a klal called hilchasa. Hilchasa is actually the when the Gemara actually will paskin according to opinion. Say hilchasa Rebbe Ploni. Hilchasa according to so and so opinion, and that'll be at the end of a sugya, end of the Shema, at the end of a section of Gemara. Then it will paskin according to halacha. Not always will it paskin, but sometimes it will. Makes things easier when it paskins. But we have rules that we're going to learn later on that are, if the Gemara didn't clearly paskin, how do we learn how to paskin? Based on the Gemara. We don't paskin based on the Gemara, but these are rules that were shaykh, when our, number one, that were shaykh with regards to how the Rishonim paskin, how the Goyim and the Rishonim paskin, and number two, if a person is learning Gemara Alila de Hilchasa, which means that you're learning how the Gemara got down to the Shulchan Aruch, it's important to understand those rules. And we'll probably go over those over time after we've gotten through the 21 kolim of Gemara in Maguya Talmud. Tiuvta is very interesting. What happens if your Piruk is not good enough? Our Gemara that we're going to be examining in just a moment in Masechta Tzmura, it's doing it in the other way around. The other flips around Tiuvta and Piruk, because for all of them, the two opinions, neither opinion is going to be accepted in the end. Both opinions, they're trying to strengthen the opinions, but both of them end up being rejected in the end, because neither opinion is actually fully. I mean, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. These are the words of the living God, and they're both right. But both opinions are going to be rejected in the very end. But we're trying to understand and test these opinions and see how far they go. But because they're both going to be rejected at the end, then it's going to be saying Kushia Tiuvta Piruk instead of Kushia Piruk Tiuvta, which is the usual order of it. Tiuvta means a rejection. He mivuteles ha'alacha b'daya berura. If there's clear proof, like a Tiuvta, is that they're not going to just do a Tiuvta on an Amora for no reason. Here in our Gemara that we're in Masechta Tzmura, the Tiuvta happens so clearly because both opinions are not going to be accepted in the end. But when it's being clearly, it has to be a clear, in order for normal Tiuvta, it has to be a very, very clear proof. So clear that you can't make even a Piruk on it. Or in order to be a really good Tiuvta, there can't be a possible Piruk, or there can't be a sufficient Piruk, because if there is, as it says, "V'halacha k'fi chayzik ra'is Tiuvta." So in a case where there is taka no Piruk for it, there's no answer that he can give, where his opinion was just totally rejected and he couldn't give an answer on it, then the halacha is going to be going against his opinion. But there are times, actually, as he says, there is a time when a Tiuvta will come after a weak Piruk. It's not no Piruk, but it's not a strong Piruk. And sometimes if there's very rarely, but so it does happen, that sometimes there will be a Tiuvta that comes after a weak Piruk, and nonetheless we're going to poskin the Gemara will poskin a Hilchasa according to that opinion. So if there's no clear proof that he's wrong and he can't get out from under it, then there's still the possibility of poskining like him. And if you want to take a look at one of those examples in Piruk Gimel and Misha Mesa and Masech the Brachos, there's I think it's Chaf Dalet Amud Beis. There's a whole discussion regarding tefillin, regarding where the placement of tefillin should be if you're sleeping in bed. The Gemara has an interesting Tiuvta against Shmuel, and Rava says Afal pi the Amr Tiuvta to Shmuel, even though we said that there's a Tiuvta against Shmuel, halacha k'maisa, that we poskin according to Shmuel in that particular case. So it's unusual that it should happen, but it does occasionally happen. So we're going to move on to the Gemara today.
So it was they refuted his opinion, but they nevertheless...
They didn't refute him...
by him in halakha.
Yeah, they didn't refute him strong enough in order to totally knock his opinion off.
And there's no new opinion that comes in, or there's no additional opinion that gets in.
Yeah, basically, and the Indian of a Tiuvta is really not to bring in a new opinion as much as it is to shoot down the previous opinion. And a Tiuvta is what happens if an Amora just literally cannot get out from underneath. And even though the person who's arguing on him, who's challenging him, may agree with him, that's also where you come up with the question of hua makshin, hua tartzen. The person asks and the person answers, because if the asker agrees with the person who said the svara, like there's a particular instance I saw, Reb Yirmiyah asks a question of Reb Zeira, and Reb Zeira doesn't answer, but then Reb Yirmiyah answers on behalf of Reb Zeira and strengthens his svara. So there is times like that. But regardless, it comes to try and... A Tiuvta is when Rav Ashi and Ravina, who put together the Gemara, said that this is a solid rejection, there's nothing we can do about it. In our sugya that we're going to be getting into, or that we have been getting into the past couple of weeks, we dealt more in depth with the idea of Kushia and Tiuvta, actually inside the Gemara, because it did already explain what Tmura is. Tmura is there's a certain type of korban, replacing one animal for a korban with another animal that's forbidden, and that's called Tmura. And that's the Masechta that we're in, actually. It's a Masechta that's way out of the way for most yeshivas to learn, because most yeshivas are learning the Bavas and Masechta Shabbos and Masechta Chulin. That's either Smicha material or Dainendus material or Chakavitari in the Gemara, and this happens to be a little bit out of the way. However, it happens that this is a very Yesaidistic, a very foundational, very important sugya that has, in terms of the Shachar V'Tari and the Gemara, the sugya, the part of the group of part of the Gemara that we're dealing with, is a two-faceted machlekes between Abaya and Rava. Abaya says, "Kol milsa da'amar rachamana lo sabid im abid mahanya." He says anything that anything that a person does that's against what the Torah tells him to do, that the Torah says don't do it, and he does it, it has an effect. In other words, it has what he does is done. It has an effect. But, and that's the reason why he gets lashed. So because it had an effect, that's why he got lashed. But it has an effect, but that's also why he gets lashed. So that's two things by Rava. Rava says, Kol milsada amarachamana lo savid im avi lo mahanya. He says, anything that the Torah tells us not to do, if a person does it, it doesn't have an effect. Meaning, however it was before, it goes back to that. And
what was Rava's again?
Rava's opinion, he says, Kol milsada amar rachamana lo savid, anything that the Torah says not to do, im avid lo mahani. It doesn't have an effect. Whatever the person did, what Isser the person did, doesn't have an effect. In other words, whatever he'd been working on before goes back to the way it was. Lamashal, if he went I used my example of Teruma on Shabbos, that separating Teruma on Shabbos is Tikkun Keli, just for example. This is theoretical case. According to Rava, if a person did it, just as an example, if a person did it, then they get lashed because they... Okay, so it's not really a good example because Shabbos is a chiv misa.
Because he created some klipa in the world? Because he actually...
That's what Rava... Well, if you're looking for al pi pnimis ha'inyanim...
That's just the way I'm trying to understand
what
it.
Rava is doing is saying, since he caused... to use your lashon, since he caused klipa in the world because he did... Because he did... The question between Abaye and Rava is like this. What is it that causes the klipa in the world? Theoretically, I'm saying. Abaye says what causes it is that there's an effect. Rava says what causes it is that he did what the Torah told him not to do. In other words, Rava says that whatever he did doesn't have an effect. He did an Yisr, it doesn't have an effect. It goes back to the way it was before. In other words, if he was to separate, I'll use the example of Teruma bad on good. According to Rava, Teruma from bad produce on good produce, which is not allowed. You're supposed to make your Teruma from the best. But if you have good produce and bad produce, and you separate Teruma from bad produce, the halacha is that the Teruma is Teruma. That's a problem for Rava, because Rava, according to Rava, although it's explained over there, Rava says it's an exception, but according to Rava, Stam, if this person had separated Teruma from bad produce on good produce, it wouldn't be Teruma. It would be like they just said words, it didn't have any effect, and they get lashed for trying. According to Abaye, so Abaye says that that whatever he does has an effect.
Is he denying then that he's created this klipa dika thing in the world?
He's saying that it actually doesn't have an effect. It actually goes back. So
what do you mean by effect?
Meaning, he says he goes to separate Teruma, and he did separated Teruma be'aveda. It isn't Teruma. It remains being tevel on tev produce.
Oh, but for Abaye that would actually become Teruma.
And he'd get lashed. Because why did he get lashed according to Rava? According to Rava, it wouldn't become Teruma. That's okay. It's one of the challenges.
He would still get lashed, though, right?
But he would get lashed. Yes, he would still get lashed according to Rava. But we explain actually. I'm just using this as an example, but actually in the sugya we went over last week, so it actually is explaining that really it's an exception to the rule, and there's a pasuk for it. There's a verse that's explaining why it works even for Rava to separate the bad from the good. But I'm saying stam with that, if there had not been a pasuk that said yes, you can do it, that here's just using as an example.
Can we try a different example just for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Say you someone steals water from someone else's well. There's a sign that says no trespassing, this is ours. He goes in, he steals water from the well.
In any case, he has to pay it. I mean,
There's an infinite amount of water in the well.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no effect. One of them is saying that there's a violation because he broke the rule, right? And the other is saying he doesn't get lashes because there was no effect. Is that correct?
In halacha, if theoretically, so we'll say theoretically a person got lashes for trespassing. Yeah, and so this person trespassed, and they took water and they left, but they didn't leave any change, nothing, no problem with not even a single footprint on the grass, and everything was but it happened to be that the person saw them out the window and goes angry at them, took them to baste it. This is just a theoretical case, as an example. So Rava would say, because he did it, he gets lashed, even though there was no effect. And Abaya would say, because he didn't have an effect, he doesn't get lashed.
So
why would someone get reprimanded for something that's halakhically acceptable?
We're not talking about something that's halakhically acceptable.
No, but it said that for Rava, truma is accepted, and he still gets lashed.
No. In the case, I was talking about if he separates truma avera, if the manner in which he separates truma is an avera.
So how does that work out? Don't they cancel each other? If it's avera, it's not a mitzvah.
So Rava, the question is whether the food that he separated as truma becomes truma. According to Rava, theoretically, it would not become truma taka. It would be just normal. It would still everything would be still untithed produce, and he'd have to separate truma again. According to Abaye, if he did it, then he did it, and now he gets lashed for doing it.
So that's so interesting.
So the case that we mentioned, that the entire Masechta is based on, is called Tamura. So you remember how I said sometimes a Kushia, the lashon of a Kushia, there's various different lashonos. So in this sugya, this is our lashon of a Kushia here. It would translate, I suppose, and behold, but v'harei is your lashon of Kushia here in this sugya. So you almost never, in this entire sugya, you almost don't see meisvei, because it's using v'harei to introduce a new challenge. So remember, I said there's a specific, there's different lashonos that are used for kushia. I'm showing you this to show you the construct of a kushia and tiuvta, but this one doesn't actually use the meisvei isvei siman. But anytime you see meisvei and isvei in a gemara, it's going to be doing this. V'harei tmura. Behold, there's the case of Tmura, the Amar Rachamana. So you remember, Tmura, I said, was a forbidden way of switching one animal for another animal in a korban. So he said the first animal is and in the end, what happens is that the first animal and the second animal are both. He says this animal in place of this animal, and then the first animal is still Kaddish, the first animal is still holy, the second animal is now also holy, and the guy gets lashed. So that's what this entire category of Tamura is what the Masechta is about. It's dealing with this case and where does it apply and how is it done. But it says, okay, the Torah said, Lo yachlifenu, v'lo yamer. You're not allowed to switch it up. You're not allowed to flip one animal for another animal. Below Yamir, and you're not allowed to do Tamura, to switch them up. Below Yamir, so the Tana, and we learned in a Mishnah, it's interesting, it's the lashon here. Lo sha'adam rashai lahamir, not that a person is permitted to do Tamura, because it's aser. But if he did do it, it's done. the animals switch up. It's Tmura, V'Seifig es Harabayim, and he suffers through 40 lashes. Alma Mehanya. What did we have just now? Person did an Isser against the Torah, and they had an effect. What they did was done, and then because what they did was done, then they get lashed for 40 times. Alma, so we find Mahania, it actually has an effect. Tiuvta de Rava. You understand how it's a Tiuvta against Rava? Rava said the reason why he gets lashed is because he did what the Torah told him not to do, and what he did not have an effect. This means that according to Rava, before we go on and explain how Rava gets out from under that, according to Rava, the Gemara is thinking that Rava is interpreting this, that in Rava, in this case, Rava would have said, yes, you tried, very nice. The first animal is Kadesh, the second animal is Chulin, it's perfectly fine, it's not consecrated at all. You didn't succeed in doing anything, you said words in general, Devarim Ba'alma, and you get lashed anyway because you did what the Torah told you not to do. That's what Rava says. Now, that's why we had a Tiuvta against Rava here. It's because seemingly it's a direct contradiction to what Rava said. What he did an Isser, it had an effect, and he got lashed for it. Tiuvta de Rava. Now, this is where it's coming in. The Gemara is answering on behalf of Rava what to do. Amar lecha, Rava would say to you, Amar lecha, Rava, Sha'ani Hasam, it's different over there. Why? Da'amakra, because the verse says the Torah takes out from it, and the Torah gives a specific outcome of what this case should be. Rava can't say that it didn't have an effect, because the Torah says it does have an effect. The Torah says specifically it does have an effect. It says, V'hayahu u'tmaraso yiyah kodesh. It says the animal and its replacement are both going to have Kedusha's korban on them. There's going to be not one, not the other. He's both, and the Torah, since the Torah says clearly in pasuk that the Torah says clearly in pasuk that it had an effect and it will have an effect. That what he did is going to have an effect. When he said that this animal should be in place of this animal in a manner of Tmura. So then he says, then Rava must therefore agree that it has an effect, and therefore the Mishnah is no kasha on Rava. Rava has no problem with this Mishnah because the Torah specifically says an answer.
Is he saying then that this is just an exception to the rule?
Yes. Precisely. Because the Torah said it clearly, it's an exception to the rule. But if the Torah didn't say it clearly that this Isser should have an effect, then therefore it doesn't have an effect. Now, for Abaya, who says that it's going to have an effect anyway, what does the Torah need to say? V'hayahu u'tmaraso yiyah kodesh.
He has to have some other way of explaining it.
He has to have some other way of explaining it. Just like we said. Because the Torah doesn't have a single word that's levatala. That's for nothing. Not a single word, and certainly not half a pasuk is going to be coming for no reason at all. And therefore, Abaya, since Rava needs this pasuk, this v'hayahu t'maraso yiyah kadesh, if they're both going to be kadesh, then why does that if Rava's using that, but Abaya doesn't need it? Because Abaya says that automatically what he did had an effect. If what he did had an effect, then it and its Tamura are both Kadesh. Both of them are become Korbanos. And so what's the Chiddush? The Torah doesn't need to be telling us something we already know. So the Gemara is asking, according to Abaya, what does Abaya do with V'haya hu u'tzmaraso yiyah Kadesh? Kadesh. Yeah? Kadesh. Or the Abaya, that's what it's asking. By Ilavda Amarachamana Bahayahu Tmaraso Bahayahu Tmaraso. If the Torah didn't say Hu Utmarase, it didn't say both, it didn't tell us both, according to Abaya, Hada Amina, I would have said Teitzizu V'sichnazu, that one of them goes out and the other one comes in. Meaning that he gets lashed because it had an effect. Yes, very nice. But only one of the animals is going to be caught kodesh. The first one that was there before is not a korban anymore. That's chulin. And the one that he wanted in place of it becomes the korban. So, yeah.
Can you just explain one more time what exactly the Isser was when he switched the animals?
So there's an Isser of Tamura, that there's a certain way that you're not supposed to do it. There is a way of to be mchal, the animal, meaning to deconsecrate it and onto money and put it on, or deconsecrate the animal onto another animal. That's called deconsecration. But there's another type of switching called Tamura, which is that you're switching directly one to the other. You're deconsecrating. You're saying this one should be in place of this one, rather than the holiness of this one should be on this one. Basically, like that. Deconsecration is where you take the holiness off of one and try and put it on the other, and that's good. That's fine. But Tamura is putting one animal in the place of the other, and that's a problem. So the Torah says don't do that. So the Torah says you can move the Kedusha, but you can't just switch the animal out. And so Tamura, he says if he tries to do Tamura, then both animals are going to be Kodesh. Meaning both animals are going to be holy. Both animals are going to be going to the Mizbeach. And because of that, so then that's the Isser of Tamura.
And the pasuk is saying that B'diavad both will become Kodesh. B'diavad.
The entire concept of Tamura, the entire Masechta is a B'diavad Masechta. You're not supposed to do it, but if you did it, this is what happens.
And now Abaya is saying, I need this pasuk. Why? Because
he's saying, if Abaya says he had an effect, yeah?
Right.
But you might say, according to Abaya, that only that it should be a full effect. He should get lashed, yes, very nice, but he had to have a full effect. Meaning one animal should be kodesh, and the other animal should be chulin. The first animal that was a korban before is now going to be chulin, is going to go out to be normal, average, run-of-the-mill animal, and the other animal that he wanted to put in there is going to be kodesh. Yes? That's what we would think.
Can you please just explain what it means when it says tetzezu v'niknox?
Teitzezu, this one goes out from its kedusha, and tichnazu in its place. One goes out, and the other one goes into its place.
What does that mean?
It means that the first
one stops being holy.
Yeah, one stops being holy, and the other one becomes holy.
And you would have thought that if the pasuk didn't tell you that they both become holy.
If the pasuk didn't beferush say hu utmaraso kodesh, then we would have thought, according to Abaya, that one would become holy and the other one would become not holy, and then he would get lashed because he did it. But the Torah has to tell us that it didn't work all the way.
But isn't Abaya's whole thing that the Isser is effectual? So I would have expected that even without the pasuk, he would still say that they both become kodesh.
The goal is to make one of them kodesh. The goal is to make the second one kodesh and take the first one out.
So the real kodesh then
is that both of them
have become
yeah,
kodesh.
That's precisely.
And that's what the pasuk is coming to tell us.
According to Abaya.
Right.
According to Rava, the pasuk is entirely coming to tell us this whole svara about it having an effect. And in B'toich it having effect, in the process of it having effect, it also happens to be that it happens on both. That the Torah says this one and this one are kodesh. Now, Bahade, now we're going to start a new challenge here. It's another Mesve that's coming from above. Mesve always comes from above. Remember that. Bahade B'chayr, the case of B'chayr.
What is Kamashmalan?
Kamashmalan, the Gemara comes to teach us, this pasuk comes to teach us. Kamashmalan means kind of like, it teaches us otherwise. Kamashmalan means it comes to imply for us, it comes to teach to us. So,
this
we
is
would
just
have thought...
a continuation of Abaya's...
Yeah. Then the
Sorry.
bias thing ends here.
Okay.
Havamina tezes u'v'teifnazu kamashmalan. No, both of them become kodesh. Har b'chayr, the case of b'chayr. You guys say it every single day. I'm sure those of you who put on Rabbeinu Tom's.
What, by the way, is what's the? Is there any conclusion to this, or are we? It's part of a big continuation.
It's a bit. This entire thing is one big continuation.
Okay.
We're dealing with the same Abaya Svaras and the same Rava Svaras, just being challenged in different ways through different parts of Halacha all throughout Shas. So this is a very klalistic asudika, and it's going to be going back and forth all over the place, and we're going to be spending a little more time on it over the next couple of weeks probably. But then once we finish it, then hopefully we'll have a very good idea of what a mesve does and what a Tiuvta and Piruk are intending to do. And once you have that, that's 90% of the Shakli V'Tari and the Gemara. The Maso Mata, going back and forth is mostly a majority of it, vast majority of it is coming in the form of Kushias and Tiuvtas. So the Gemara continues with this. It's actually a little late, so we might not start a whole new case here. I'll finish now, and we'll finish here, and next week we'll begin as well on this case. Maybe do a little teeny review on what an actual Kushia and Tiuvta is. Any questions quickly before we finish up? No? Okay. All right, excellent. So next week we'll resume talking a little more about Kushia and Tiuvta and how they work, and working through this sugya. And then we will move Bezras Hashem on to Urminhu, Ramya, Hatkafta, the other types of challenges that are going into how the Shakli V'Tari of the Gemara is working. So thanks guys, and you can feel free to come out to me throughout the week and ask questions.